This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 23rd of November, and I am 2J.
I'm Tuam.
And I am Miss K, your host. Again, in case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. Daily Nation, classes and the 10th trees in COVID crisis. The Standard, horror of teens in party orgies. And The Star, Uhuru lays bare crime surge in security report. Let's start with The Standard, horror of teens in party orgies.
I never thought I'd be analyzing this, but
right?
Yes, but this is scary. Horror of teens in party orgies. Now, 44 children have been seized and arrested after a party in a Mountain View house. I don't want to discuss what was found there. You can buy today's Standard if you want to find out.
Or read it online.
Or read it online. But look, I think there was all merit for Magoha to tell us, let's go back to schools. Because the kind of stuff we are reading here about underage children and the stuff they were doing is a little bit scary. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine what parents are feeling when they see this. Yeah,
no, definitely. It is scary. I think part of what the Standard mentions as well is that this came after outcry over 3 girls who it was uncertain if they had been kidnapped, if they went missing, if they ran away, and then they were also found in quite compromising situations. But I think what this story really told me is how out of touch our police units are, in relation to social media, right? They're talking about it like it's this thing that they don't understand. It's like teaching your grandfather how to use a computer, right?
It's true. It's this far out thing that is weird and ununderstandable and mystical and perhaps magical.
So I think they need to really move into the social media age. I think that this was an instance where they found that communication happens in ways that they don't understand. People don't SMS anymore. These kids are having communications and conversations through live videos, through Instagram direct messages. So I think the police need to get it together.
There is, and Prof like saying this, school is like regimentation. So when break time comes, there is a bell. Ding, ding, ding. You hear that, you go for a small break, you go back to class. Then the bell rings, class, you see history teacher passing, and then the math teacher goes, and then there will be PE, and then there will be... Your mind is used to a certain order of doing things. And that regimentation is what actually crafts the child, is what makes the child. But if a child stays home with their parents for all this time,
you get frustrated.
You get frustrated, and then they start doing things. I mean, I'm imagining as well, what a child would normally do.
Or a teenager.
Or a teenager for that matter.
Yeah, all right. A bit of a dark headline.
What do we do with this headline?
Let's just park it for the moment.
Okay, put in the parking bay. The Star, Uhuru lays bare crime surge in security report. As part of his constitutional duty, the president tabled a report in Parliament on the state of the nation's national security. That's part of the functions that we have given our president. And in this report, it stated that crime in Kenya has increased by 5.8% in 2019, partly to blame are the political elite, whom the report accused of supporting and bankrolling activities of outlawed groups. These groups include Mungiki in parts of Nyeri, Murang'a, Kirinyaga, Kiambu and Laikipia counties. In Mombasa, these include Wajuku, Wabibi, Wakaliwao, Wakali Kwanza. In Kisumu and Kakamega and Bungoma counties, there's 42 brothers. In Kiambu, there's Kamagira and Kwil operating in Thika and Kikuyu areas. And it goes on to list different groups that are under the support of certain political elite. The report also stated that the cybercrime incidents have also increased with a high of 1,203 cases examined by the DCI, Digital Forensic Laboratory, as compared to 992 cases in 2019. And it was also revealed that corruption court cases involve up to 224 billion for the past 3 years. I feel like the tone of this report was very negative, yet bearing in mind that I think that there have been some gains made by DCI and by the investigatory bodies.
The one thing I would want to say, and then suggest that we toss this headline altogether, is that this is such lazy journalism, honestly. I think you have this fantastic report, while it may be negative. You have a great report that comes, in front of the president's desk, and he, signs it, whatever, and they don't give us any analysis.
They just regurgitate.
I would have been better off reading the report myself.
That's true.
Than buying a copy of the Standard.
Absolutely.
So can we toss it?
Definitely. Tossed.
Yes.
Finally, the Daily Nation. We have classes under tents, trees in COVID crisis. So basically, the Daily Nation is telling us that students will have to learn under trees and tents in dining halls once schools reopen in January. So essentially before, classes would hold an average of 40 to 60 students. But now under COVID restrictions, the maximum is 25 learners per class. So they're having a few difficulties with that. Again, more lazy journalism. I think that this is a chance for the government to adapt. In the same way that we, had these hospital beds made by local Kenyans, which were then able to, figure out that deficit we had in the hospitals. And the same way with the school desks, where the president asked for them to...
Absolutely.
This is a moment to adapt. And I think we saw with Aga Khan Hospital, they did this project where they built an outdoor hospital to kind of like beat the issues of not having enough beds. And that was successful. So in the same way, I think people just stop complaining.
It's an opportunity for innovation.
To adapt.
That's
so
precisely.
To me, this is just excuses.
The Daily Nation and Business Daily have been of late pushing headlines that are very pessimistic. In fact, Daily Nation, you should be called a daily pessimism. You read the Nation and you think country is on fire all the time. I wonder who the editors are. Anyway.
Adapt. I think that's a lesson that 2020 has taught us.
Yes, absolutely.
So what do? We have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines. For you, we ask ourselves 3 questions. Is the headline topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
I think they're all lazy.
Then we toss them all. We have no winning headline.
Yes.
Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break them down for you. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic, and is it effective or just plain lazy?
What is this Iga has drawn for us? It's is it a Kenya? What is it? As a KPLC hat saying, "Stop it! I'm used to working in the darkness."
With a solar panel at the top lighting the way.
But then obviously there's nobody there from KPLC. It's just a hat.
It's just a
single yellow hat. So I think the relevance here is that there's been this growing shift towards solar energy. And KPLC, so a lot of the time they have the industrial customers, which account for 54.8% of their customer base. And you have a lot of them who are shifting to say, why should I pay you for electricity when the sun is
it's a reliable source.
Exactly, free, reliable. So I think KPLC are just grumpy. But if you give people bad service, what do you expect?
Absolutely. But I think what was also telling us, the KPLC will probably soon come not to exist if people are turning to reliable sources of power, solar energy, wind energy, battery systems.
I'm not sure what I think about the cartoon.
I think we just toss it.
We toss it? Okay, toss.
I agree.
Gado, you have a caricature of Bensouda, and she seems to be writing some charges or drawing up some charges against Uganda's President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. I think the backdrop of this is the violence that we've been seeing on our screens from Kampala and other parts of Uganda, where I think people are getting shot. I don't know who's shooting
they say already 49 people have been killed, and this is in the run-up to the election.
Yes, but I saw Museveni blaming some Muzungu person for advising Bobby Wine's party to do terror. Is it some political terrorism or that or something of that nature? And that it is the opposition that is starting violence. And the same has been said to have happened in Tanzania. So maybe we need to listen to both sides of the story.
Because I think what happened is that there was a petition that was sent to the ICC in regards to what Museveni has been doing.
By the former Forum for Democratic Change Party President Kizza Besigye.
Which to me is quite sad that as Africans we find that the ICC is our last resort. If you look at the charges that they've listed against all potential people, they have a majority of African descent.
That is true.
It's just a court that attacks Africans instead of attacking Muzungus as well. So
I think they're calling us easy targets, and if there's anything that we should do is rise up to bullies.
It's a boring cartoon.
I think it's a boring cartoon. Let's go to the Star, and also has a caricature of Chef Raila Odinga and Chef Uhuru Kenyatta cooking a BBI stew, and there, fresh from Dubai, is William Ruto as Salt Bay, and Salt Bay is adding his proposals to the BBI stew. Not a bad cartoon. I think backdrop of this, I think we all saw it. William Ruto with Salt Bay
Turkish butcher,
and they were salting some very nice looking steak.
Yeah, and then there were some comments that RUTO made after.
Yeah.
He said, hustler Salt Bay has created a successful hustle out of salt, nyama and a knife. And so he challenged entrepreneurs in Kenya to do the same thing. He said to up their game in the meat business. Honestly, this guy is...
I mean, this lacks pure imagination.
It's actually embarrassing, right? That you would tell people that this is the way to become successful, right? That this is how you're convincing people that they're going to have a better life in this way.
And then he called him hustler.
Salt Bay.
Hustle. Oh,
he's becoming like a track that's broken.
Yeah.
So what do you say about the cartoon though?
I like the cartoon.
I think it's a funny cartoon. He looks funny with the...
I like the cartoon.
And then we have a winning cartoon from The Star.
Absolutely.
And now for our final thought. But before, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville.
Yeah, close. So this week we'll be looking at some political theorists and some of the ideas that they have espouted and see if they still hold up today. So de Tocqueville was a French sociologist and political theorist, and so he traveled to the United States in 1831, and he went there in an effort to study their prison, just their prisons, and he returned instead, not with a report about prisons, but with these observations that he'd made about the United States, and it was codified in this book.
Yes.
And so it has actually come to be viewed as one of the most influential books about the United States in the 19th century.
Yeah.
So the book has observations about equality and individualism, and his work remains a valuable explanation of America to Europeans, but also an explanation of America to Americans as well.
Yes.
And so, as this book revealed, de Tocqueville believed that equality was the greatest political and social idea of his era.
Yes.
And he thought that the United States offered the most advanced example of equality in action. And so he was impressed by what he saw in American life. He admired the stability of its economy, and he was very confused by the popularity of churches and why Americans were such overly religious people. But he also noted the irony of the country's freedom-loving, characteristics, but at the same time you have the mistreatment of Native Americans and their embracing of slavery. So he found that quite a strange irony. And so the thesis in this book was very simple. He said that after careful consideration or observation of American customs, laws, and institutions and religions, he determined that the one defining factor in the US was the equality of conditions. And he meant by this that there was no feudal tradition in all of its social hierarchies. Americans were very mobile people. They were mobile socially, they were mobile economically. You could become an entrepreneur and build an empire, or you could become a politician and become president. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from or who your parents were. There was a lot of equality. And he says that, of course, in this context, when you look at France, where he came from, so his family were actually nobility, and they had been killed during the French Revolution of 1789. And he says of the French that the monarchy regarded its people as weak and feeble beings who must forever be guided by the hand, and that it was necessary to obstruct, to thwart, and to restrain individual freedom in order to secure an abundance of material goods. Sounds like an African monarchy as well. And so for de Tocqueville, being in America, he sees this huge change from what he was used to living in.
Yeah.
But the question is, how true is this book today? I don't know about democracy in America in 2020.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
There is a recurrent theme in this book, and it's called Tyranny of the Majority. And he tells us of the dangers of tyranny of the majority. And I want to read something he says about that. He says, I regard it as an impulse and a detestable maxim that in matters of government, the majority of a people has the right to do everything. And nevertheless, I place the origin of all powers in the will of the majority. What it's basically saying here is that there's a conundrum. That he recognizes that the origins of he recognizes in the will of the majority. He knows that, but he's also saying that there is a danger in having the will of the majority, and this he encapsulates by calling he calls it democratic excesses. Right. And what Tocqueville is telling us here is that he criticized the way white majorities supported slavery and the unjust treatment of blacks and Native Americans. But he says, in fact, the greatest danger Americans faced was inherent in their treatment of unpopular minorities. Now, let's ground this to a reality. Gema and the Kalenjin communities have ruled this country. Gema for 34 years and the Kalenjin for 24 years.
Yeah.
And what we don't want to recognize is that this is our problem, the dangers of the tyranny of the majority.
Yep.
We have been dealing with a problematic electoral equation that has given us problems every electoral cycle. Now, just 3 years ago, Kenya lost 10% of its GDP because of one mad decision of annulling the election. Just one mad decision. And that was constitutional. We went back to our constitution because it said we can do it. We lost 10% of our GDP. But the question we're being asked to raise is this: does it have to be this way every 5 years?
Yeah.
If we go until 2022 without changing the situation, how sure are we that Kalenjins and Nuers will not fight in 2022?
Yeah, I like that thing about democratic excessiveness.
Yes.
Yeah, the will of the majority sometimes becomes tyrannical.
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say that this is still considered essential reading in the US, so I guess it's still insightful, even though it was written hundreds of years ago. I'd like to talk about Chapter 2 on the point of departure and its importance for the future of Anglo-Americans. Here he was discussing the usefulness of knowing the point of departure of our people in order to understand their social state and their laws. So de Tocqueville uses the metaphor of the human life to argue that in order to understand a nation's development, we must look to its origin. In fact, I will quote, he says, "Examine the child in the arms of his mother. See the exterior world reflected for the first time in the dark mirrors of his intellect. Contemplate the first words that catch his eyes. Listen to the first words that awaken his slumbering powers of thought. Finally, witness the first struggles that he has to sustain. And only then will you understand the origin of the prejudices, the habits, the passions that are going to dominate his life. The whole man is there, so to speak, in the infant swaddled in his cradle." So he says that a similar thing happens among nations. Peoples always feel the effects of their origin. The circumstances that accompanied their birth and were useful to their development influence all the course of the rest of their life. So for de Tocqueville, it was very difficult for him to look at France and look at its origins, because it was a historical nation, and perhaps he could only do that by looking through the annals of history. But America was still a young nation, a very young democracy. And he thought by looking at its origins and seeing the pilgrims when they came in, their love for religion, their love for individuality, he would understand what it was that Americans valued and who they were as a people.
Yeah.
I'd like to agree with him, and I'd like to say that we too are a young nation, and we can look to our origins to understand who we are right now. And I'd like to borrow from the words of the great Professor Mutahi Ngonyi in talking about the engineering of the state as a company, the Rhodesian model. He says that when Cecil Rhodes imagined a highway from Cape to Cairo, the original blueprint for the African state was hatched. The design was simple: to build a highway that would transport the virgin resources from the hinterlands to the waterways. To supervise this extraction, he needed a secretive, cold-blooded machine to be called the state. But for its operations to be efficient, it had to be designed as an extraction company, ruthless, interest-serving and hungry. And this is how the Imperial British East Africa Company, constituted as the original modern state in the East African Protectorate, was formed. At the core of its DNA, it was extractionist, although the outer shell mimicked a modern state. Now, I'd like to tell you that if you have a problem with who we are as Kenyans, are we corrupt? Yes. Are we are we mad? Yes. Are we self-serving and self-interested? Yes. Are we also secretive? Yes. Then perhaps we need to go back to our origins and understand that we were originally a company that was formed for extraction. This company was then bought out by the British government. In fact, in 1895, the British government paid the IBEA £250,000 to surrender the charter to the area that is now Kenya. In fact, we were the product of a sale so that IBEA could stop the money it was hemorrhaging, trying to expand itself. If you want to understand who we are as Kenyans, we need to go back to our past and we need to undo those pasts, those negative connotations. That 75 or 76 years of watching these Mzungus eat and eat, such that when we took over,
we did the same thing.
We did the same thing. The country was, we were constructed as a Rhodesian state. Now we took that template, and the Africans, of course, once they saw how the Mzungu was extracting, they had to absolutely
monkey see, monkey do.
Monkey see, monkey do. I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I mean, those fellows, the Givangos of this world, and that other mad economist, always complaining about corruption. Please don't blame current government. Blame the colonialists.
Today we had no winning headline, but we had a winning cartoon from the Star. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. Nothing is more wonderful than the art of being free, but nothing is harder to learn how to use than freedom. Have a great week.
Yes.